Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gil Epen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gil@epen.info. My guest today is Dr. Dipayan Ghosh, who is a co-director of the Digital Platforms and Democracy Project at the Harvard Kennedy School and faculty at Harvard Law School. He's the author of Terms of Disservice: How Silicon Valley is Destructive by Design. He previously led strategic efforts on privacy at Facebook and served as an economic advisor in the White House during the Obama administration. Welcome, Dipayan.
Thanks so much for having me, Gil.
Absolutely. So I want to start with a few of your articles, recent articles, and the first one is entitled "A New Digital Social Contract to Encourage Internet Competition," in which you say over the past year, the common conception that the lion's share of the digital advertising market would securely remain the dominion of Facebook and Google for the foreseeable future was turned on its head with the emergence of an entirely new player, Amazon. The company's emergence in digital advertising has raised the idea that it might present a major challenge to the market power that Facebook and Google have developed in the sector over the past many years. To tell you the truth, Dipayan, I wasn't aware that Amazon has entered digital advertising. But in a very short period of time, they built up a huge share, right? 8 to 10% of the market or something like that. But you in the paper have argued that it doesn't really matter from a market power perspective. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, Gil. Well, first, thank you for having me. You know, I love your podcast, and you have such excellent guests. So I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah.
This paper, which I published in the Antitrust Chronicle, is really this part of it. I love the fact that you've highlighted, because there's this sort of implication that is drawn by companies like Facebook, which I worked for, and companies like Google. Well, I shouldn't say companies like. I really mean Facebook and Google.
There are no companies like it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But a lot of people have raised the idea that Facebook and Google have a lot of market power, to which Facebook and Google tend to say that, you know what, we don't have market power, because look at where we make our revenue. We make our revenue in the realm of digital advertising. Yeah. The vast share of our revenue comes from digital advertising, and there's plenty of competition in the space of digital advertising. We, Facebook, have 20 to 25% of that market. We, Google, have 30 to 35%. Amazon is coming along. Within 3-4 years, it's gotten to 8 to 10%. And then there's a lot of other companies that occupy the rest of that 40, 50% of the market, Snapchat, Microsoft, these kinds of companies come into
and
play.
They will say, I would imagine they will say this is contestable markets, even though they have share, it could be contested at any time, right?
Precisely. That they'll say that, not only do we have all the, we only together only have 60% of the share of this market, which means that neither of us has a technical monopoly.
Yeah.
Other companies are breathing down our neck. So there's plenty of competition. Yeah. Go away, regulators. So to that, what I would say, and what I argue in this paper, is that that's the wrong analysis, because that's the wrong market to look at. The market that Facebook and Google have monopolized is not digital advertising.
Yeah.
You recall that these are two-sided platforms. These companies are two-sided platforms where, to take Google as an example, it is certainly working with advertisers on one side of the market, where Chanel and the NBA and the NFL come to Google and spend their marketing budgets to target individuals over Google's many platforms. But on the other side of the platform, Google is also working directly with consumers, those of us who use Google search or YouTube or email or whatever it might be, maps. And it's that side of the market that this company has monopolized. And what is that market? Well, each of these, if you think about it, the four that I mentioned, for instance, online video for YouTube, maps for Google Maps, Gmail and email, and search, Google search and internet search, each of these is a dominant company in that specific space.
Right.
And by dominant, I mean, perhaps more than 50, more than, in some cases, 90% of consumer use of any product in that market goes to Google. And so
from a consumer perspective, Dipayan, so from a consumer perspective, anytime you think about any of those services, your first thought is to use those products, right? By definition, that's sort of your first choice, right? Only if you cannot find something there, which is very unlikely, that you look for something else.
Exactly. There's no doubt in my mind about that. In the sense that, these companies have almost a network effect where you hear about Google Maps from someone and you know that, well, Google Maps has to be the best service, right, or Gmail or YouTube. And indeed, they've become so powerful that it's not really a word of mouth sort of thing anymore. It's not really even necessary that you hear about these things from your friends or you see their content on these platforms first. But now, of course, when we search anything, it's these services that are prioritized over all else. And indeed, I would argue also that perhaps fittingly, they are probably the best services available on the market.
Right.
Google Maps there's nothing better than Google Maps. There's nothing better maybe than Gmail from a consumer perspective, just thinking about convenience and style.
So that is that is economists argue sometimes about consumer welfare, right? So yeah, it is okay for these type of monopolies to exist, but look at the consumer welfare side of it. You're getting great products that are essentially free. So why worry?
Well, I would argue that they're not free.
Yeah.
Google has, let's go back to the example of Google search. We can also pick on Facebook for a moment. So Facebook has monopolized, in its case, other sectors, for instance, social media and web-based text messaging. It's a dominant company through its various platforms, Messenger, WhatsApp, the Big Blue app, and Instagram, and other services. It has this dominating market share in the U.S. Over social media and web-based text messaging. Yeah. What's the currency that's lifting from consumers? The currency is not dollars. We don't feel our wallets getting lighter. We don't see our bank accounts getting smaller. Instead, it's not simply data. A lot of people argue that data is the new oil or data is the new currency. I think that's a little bit too simplistic. I would argue that it's a new form of currency. It's a lot of companies have our data. Bank of America has our data. Goldman Sachs has our data. Our insurance companies have our. Facebook has not only our data, and it is especially sensitive data, but other companies have especially sensitive data too. But it has our data, and it has a monopolized control over our attention in these subsectors of a broader industry that I call the consumer internet, where within the consumer internet, social media and search and all these dialogical sorts of platforms fall. Facebook is able to rake at a monopolistic rate, I would argue, a currency from us in the form of our data, in the form of our attention, and this complex combination thereof. Rake that at a monopolistic rate, and then charge fair rates for it from marketers, from those Chanels and those NBAs who are trying to target us.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So, you sort of look at you say it's aggregate. Let's call it aggregate attention, aggregate minutes of attention, which is sort of a constrained resource, right? You got 8.5 billion people. You cannot change that. You got 24 hours a day. You cannot change that. So the aggregate potential attention is constant. And when you get a lion's share of that aggregate attention, the power that you're deriving from that is not the typical monopoly power, is what you're arguing, right?
True. It's not typical. In fact, it's a natural monopoly almost. I would argue that these companies are increasingly becoming natural monopolies where they have that very powerful network effect where we can't see past Gmail. There's no secondary service that comes close to competing with Gmail in convenience. I have friends who've tried other kinds of services and they've come back to Gmail after time. There's no competing service for Instagram. We can't imagine other companies unseating these in the American media ecosystem.
Yeah.
And yes, absolutely, they're becoming these very powerful natural monopolies whereby they're part of they're taking advantage of a very powerful network effect. I shouldn't say taking advantage. It occurs naturally, this very powerful network effect.
Yeah. So what's your perception? Why aren't there competing services? Is it because once you get to some percentage of that available mind share, the first mover advantages are so high, it just takes too much of an investment for it's almost impossible to enter the market. So why are there competing services? Is what I'm asking.
Gil, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That there I'd say three things. With this first mover advantage in this broader consumer internet industry. Second, there is a very powerful network effect because of the nature of the consumer internet industry. And third, these companies undertake efforts, especially once they've gained some power, they undertake efforts to hold their would-be rivals at bay. And we've seen some evidence of that, which is why we've seen antitrust inquiries and anti-competitive inquiries from Europe and the US and other jurisdictions. But I would say that, yes, it's probably this combination of things that really institutes a half organic, half artificial barrier to entry for anyone else in the market. Right. And that's the biggest concern, I think.
And so, Instagram is a good example of that. So what Facebook, I think what they have said is, I don't know what the price tag was, but many hundreds of millions of dollars. They said we found the product to be pretty good, pretty okay. We could have done it ourselves, but it's going to cost us more. So we just went and bought them. And, anybody else could do something better at a future time and compete with us. So, this idea that I can, if I'm Facebook or Google, I can just go out and buy something that I believe is sort of inferior, but it's going to cost me more to get there. And the regulators are basically saying, "Oh yeah, that sounds right. That's okay."
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, maybe it could very well be the case that yes, Instagram. I think it was purchased for about a 1 billion. Instagram, when it was purchased, benefited, thereafter benefited from being under Facebook. I mean, the platform benefited, not the founders necessarily, but the platform benefited from being under Facebook because it grew, and its impact now in the American social media market is dominant. Let's say it certainly has benefited from being under Facebook. But let's now ask the question. Let's say Facebook was prevented from this purchase. And let's say Facebook did have to, in fact, spend all that money, as it itself has argued, did have to spend all that money to develop a system that could effectively compete with Instagram. Well, maybe that would have been the right thing for society in any case. Maybe that would have pushed both Facebook and Instagram to develop a service that dual services that have to compete with one another. Maybe it would have, filled the market. Maybe it would have redistributed a lot of wealth from Facebook to the rest of the labor market. Maybe it would have opened up and unlocked a lot of more opportunity for more people to enter the industry or take advantage of all this distribution of capital.
But how did we get here, Dipayan? So I believe 6 companies or something like that with market caps between 1 trillion and 2 trillion is something like 1/3 of the S&P 500 is locked up into 6 companies. These are all major red flags from a monopoly perspective. But why is that we haven't been able to regulate these companies? How did we get here?
I think this is really a symptom of the American economic system. We have tended to favor the open market. We've tended to favor this spirit of capitalism. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but overriding that, we've also over time developed this preference toward preference for big business, and I think over time society tends to correct itself, and there will be a time when we have sufficient political sentiment, sufficient political will to do something about this concentration of wealth, concentration of economic power and political power in these 5 or 6 companies, as you put it.
But is it just so laws are laws. So is it that our regulatory framework is not sufficient to actually deal with what we have? You mentioned in the paper Germany has something called Federal Cartel Office, FCO, that has brought a case against Facebook. Is it that the U.S. Monopoly laws and the regulatory framework is not sufficient to deal with this type of companies?
This is the subject of a major debate, as you know, Gil, right now, where and we just had this antitrust hearing in the House Judiciary Committee a few weeks ago. I think it's very much an open debate. Do we need antitrust and competition policy reform, or do our existing authorities, are they sufficient to combat the economic concentration and resulting political power that these companies have? I think we've come to a stage now where, yes, we do need to think about very strict reform. Here's what I would suggest. Let's say that we have a change of administration come November, and I only say that in the sense that new fresh blood often brings in new thinking. Right. But let's say that we have a new administration in November, or a new administration, for that matter, in 2024. 2025, and with it a lot of new thinking around what needs to happen around market competition. What I would suggest is that this hypothetical new administration think seriously about, first, enforcing our antitrust laws to the word, because right now there is some room for the FTC to do more, and it's simply not doing that. It's to be fair, it's engaging in inquiry, it's engaging in discussion with the public. It is at least in its positioning, it is suggesting that it is thinking seriously about what authority it should attempt to assert to potentially reverse a statement of policy from 2015. To potentially apply itself and enforce the existing antitrust laws more effectively or more stringently, let's say. It is thinking about all that. I'm skeptical as to whether or not under current leadership it will do all that. But that remains to be seen. But that's something I would, as a new president, one should definitely, in my personal view, really stamp that authority over the FTC. The president can't tell the FTC or any independent regulatory agency anything in particular, but what he or she can do is appoint or nominate certain kinds of individuals who will do certain kinds of things, and that is the sort of leadership I think we need. If that doesn't result in the kind of economic change that we want, then I think we need to think about rebalancing power across society, and that would involve new legislation for sure.
Yeah. So typically, you look at a market and you say there's a new entrant that has captured 10% of the market in very quickly. You would say that is sort of a competitive, sign of competitiveness in the market. But you argue that is not the case here, right? I'm talking about Amazon. And why do you think that is not the case?
I don't think that's the case here because when we, I'll put it this way. The spend on digital advertising is only currency. These are all two-sided platforms where Facebook Facebook is working on one side with its consumers. It's monopolized social media. Google has monopolized online video and email. So that should be the subject of our scrutiny.
So they have taken the market, they sort of segmentized it, and they are monopolizing segments of it.
They're monopolizing segments, and that results in the inevitable question, well, is the monopolization of this segment important enough to invite regulatory scrutiny? We can come to that in a second, but they're monopolizing these segments. They're lifting this currency from those segments, extracting it at a monopolistic rate. So they have that currency, and the place where they're exchanging that currency for dollars happens to be in digital advertising. And perhaps that's the only place where they can get that currency fairly exchanged. But do you see what I'm saying?
So that's interesting. So I don't know this, Dipayan. So if you look at the economics of some of those segments, some of that economics may not be great, right? But it's also a loss leader type potential strategy that says, I'm just sitting in that segment, mining gold, and how I'm going to monetize the gold is elsewhere.
That's exactly in my view what's happening here. That and these companies all know it. They know it well. But let's keep on hoodwinking the public. Let's keep on misleading politicians in Washington over exactly how our company works, exactly the sorts of commercial arrangements that we make, and let's keep on pushing this misleading statement that we don't have a monopoly over digital advertising.
Yeah.
Because we know that that's not the place to look. The place to look is social media. And, I think to your point, perhaps we will need new legislation. Perhaps we will need to rethink the way that we regulate this industry or set of industries, because perhaps our existing antitrust authority doesn't effectively capture market problems in the consumer internet industry, because we all know that the internet is fundamentally different from electric utilities or railroads or other traditional industries.
But they're sort of similar, though, like you said, right? They are, search could be considered a utility, and it is really a natural monopoly because there's so much scale in it. And so if that's the case, then we should consider search to be a utility that, if regulated that way, could substantially increase consumer welfare.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that it is very much a utility, and that Google search is a natural monopoly. There's no one that can ever unseat it, and Google search is not incentivized to really innovate as quickly as it would in a more competitive set of circumstances.
Yeah. So yeah. I want to jump into another paper, Dipayan. This is kind of related. It makes the monopoly power even worse. So this is the commercialization of decision-making towards a regulatory framework to address machine bias over the internet. So you say the consumer internet has created the discrimination problem worse. The business model that sits behind the front end of the internet industry is one that focuses on the unchecked collection of personal information and continual creation and refinement of behavioral profiles on the individual user, and the development of algorithms that curate that content. And, in small scale, we have seen this in healthcare, for example. I can quite remember there was a case in New York against an insurance company that had an algorithm that basically predicted how much care should be disbursed to a patient based on the patient's characteristics. And they found that, less care was needed for African Americans. And the reason was that they were using historical data, and they demanded less care previously, and that would imply that the algorithm would then continue to perpetuate history. And so you can now take this to the social media type environment to say, whatever algorithm that you create using historical data is going to be a collection of biases in it, right?
There's no doubt that yes, when you design a machine learning algorithm, or more generally a artificial intelligence to disperse insurance, or determine whether or not someone should be subject to a housing advertisement, or whatever it might be, determine someone's credit score, let's say, determine whether or not someone should be invited to join a credit card, or for that matter, determine what kinds of social content an individual should see in the news feed, or what kind of ad he or she should see on the panel in Google search engine results pages. Yeah. All of these kinds of algorithmic decisions involve the use of historical data, the application of a presumptive model, and decisions that, at the end of the day, have an impact on our consumption of media, or have an impact on our ability to do finance, have an impact on our ability to take part in and fully participate in the economy. And are companies all across the board instituting and perpetuating bias, including Google and Facebook? You bet they are. And why are they? The real reason that this is happening is that, again, revisiting our prior conversation about capitalism, we have an open market system. That means that any company can essentially do what it wants unless it's told not to, respecting, of course, the boundaries that have been set for it. The fact is that in the space of algorithmic decision making, there's very little that has been said as to what Google can or cannot do, what Facebook can or cannot do, or what any sort of company can or cannot do with respect to collecting data, analyzing data, and making decisions over that personal information.
Yeah, the scary part of this, Dipayan, is it is also possible that these companies haven't really focused on it, in the sense that when you get enamored by algorithms and artificial intelligence, you say there is so much data here, we can actually make the computers analyze all that data, and it's presumed that the computers are going to bring up the right decisions. The problem we have, though, is that historical data has a set of biases that then gets perpetuated almost unknowingly through the system, right? So this is why when you have social media monopoly power, that makes this problem worse. You can imagine a competitive environment where there are 100 firms competing for mind share. These type of errors could be found out a lot faster, I think.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, let's not be overly harsh on companies. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. I think you're right that in a space when, I'll put it this way, in a novel industry where there are very limited rules of the road that are established by governments, whether it's the U.S. or Germany or wherever, in an open capitalistic system, you have to be up there innovating. That means you have to cut as many corners as you can cut, according to what's socially acceptable, let's say, and try to dominate the industry. Try to claim that extra bit of market share, because if you don't, someone else will, until they're told not to do it. So what does that mean for a company like Facebook in designing its newsfeed algorithm, or a company like Google designing its targeted advertising? Well, that means that, look, if Google does not give the opportunity for an advertiser to reach the specific audiences that the advertiser wishes to reach, even if that potential dissemination could be discriminatory against a marginalized group of people, if Google doesn't allow that sort of behavior, then someone else will. And that someone else will capture that revenue. And this is the core reason why we need not a system of communism, not a system of socialism, not a system of pure uninhibited capitalism, but a system of regulated capitalism, where we invite that kind of innovation, but then we specify where the rules of the road should be for any company.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sometimes people confuse this. So capitalism, for capitalism to function properly, laws have to be implemented consistently, right? It is really a principle, right? You have to have the same set of rules applied to a large investment bank compared to a manufacturer, a small manufacturer. We can have only one set of rules, and they have to be consistently applied across the entire economy. That is how capitalism works. we don't really have capitalism today. We have actually set of rules. Somebody's playing soccer and somebody's playing football. And, the soccer playing people will never see the football playing people. And that is not really capitalism. It's crony capitalism.
That's exactly right. I think to cut straight to that cronyism, the part of the problem with Silicon Valley today, part of the problem with our use of the platforms of Silicon Valley today, is that these platforms have a political infrastructure behind them. They have an army of very intelligent people, policy officials within these companies, trade associations, and advocacy organizations working on behalf of these companies in Washington, D.C., who are all pushing certain messaging in Washington, pushing certain messaging in London and Brussels and New Delhi, which very often has a tremendous impact on the policymaking process. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, we're talking about, in a capitalistic system, unless you regulate against it, companies will have lobbyists. Those lobbyists will try to do right by their companies. Yeah. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, so long as we all know that it's happening and we, as a society, agree that it should be fair. Which, I have my own thoughts about it, but I think it's fair to say that lobbying is generally acceptable in the United States and in these other jurisdictions around the world. It perhaps makes sense to give companies the capacity, at least, to share their perspectives, especially in a country where we're trying to prioritize the openness of the market and prioritize the pace of innovation. But is that oftentimes there are gaps. Yes. Very often there are areas of advocacy where these companies push a certain thing at the expense of their own consumers, at the expense of Americans, yes, and the American democracy. And I think there are just too many examples like that to count.
And so that is sort of the theme of your book, right? Terms of Disservice: How Silicon Valley is Destructive by Design. Talk a bit about so what you mean by, is it the structure of Silicon Valley, or is it specific actions the companies are taking?
I think it's all of the above. Yeah. Stepping back and looking at this whole industry from a broad perspective, what we have is, let's look at 1990. In 1990, we had a new invention, the internet. Around that time, the protocols that we now have, thanks to Tim Berners-Lee. And meanwhile, of course, Moore's law was active as it is now, whereby semiconductor sizes are going down and down each year. And what does that mean? That meant that we have this new capacity and connectivity coming together with increasingly increasing pace of capacities in data storage and computing. Right. And I would say that around 2000 or so, we crossed a threshold. We crossed the threshold thanks to this open capitalistic system that we have, whereby it suddenly became possible and economically viable for companies to pursue precisely the sort of business model that you shared earlier. To, one, collect as much data as possible on people to the end of behavioral profiling. Two, develop algorithms to hold those people's attention. Algorithms that are tremendously opaque, but essentially curate content and target ads and profile individuals. And three, engage in aggressive platform growth through corporate development and other means, and effectively hold rivals at bay and take advantage of this natural monopoly, increasingly national monopoly status, whereby it's this business model that is at the core of any company that you look at in the sector, whether it's Facebook or Google or Microsoft or Amazon or even Twitter or Snapchat are trying to do this. And that's what I mean by destructive by design. It's these companies are forced into this corner. You cannot be at the top of the industry unless you follow this business model, which necessarily exploits people's data, which means you're exploiting someone's personality, their individuality, their autonomy, their privacy, for sure.
And it's I mean, the danger, as we saw in 2016, is that these platforms actually now provides a way for an external actor to get even democratic outcomes they desire.
That's exactly right. This whole design has created the capacity for instance, a Chanel or an NBA or a disinformation operator or a malicious political campaign to activate this system, activate its desire to push disinformation, to push political lies, to push hate speech, anything over the network. And it doesn't necessarily have to be advertising either. I think sophisticated actors on social media now know how to reach their constituencies through organic content too.
Yeah, but I think, you know more about this than I do. What Facebook and Google might say now is that they have very sophisticated algorithms on the platform that can tease out, smell out, any type of bad stuff and take care of it. In any industry, when you have a solution that says, I have a problem, but I have another program that takes care of that problem. we know that is never going to work. It's a bit like if I design an aircraft and I find that there is a problem, but then I'm going to put another program, that when that problem crops up, it will take care of it. Will be a disastrous design. So
I'll put it this way. Does Mark Zuckerberg care more about the principal algorithm that makes him his historic profit margins? Or does he care more about that secondary algorithm that contains the negative externalities generated by that first one? I think it goes without saying that he has to think about his shareholders first.
Yes. And so this goes back into our earlier discussion, so you think about monopoly laws and other structural features. It's almost like when you have all these threats, including external forces on this broadly available platforms that could create negative outcomes, even for democracy in this case. Maybe let me make a statement, and he can object to that, Dipayan. It's a lot better to have 15 companies rather than one or two, because in a market like that, these type of issues, I would argue, is going to be less, because if it is happening on platform 5, platform 7 and 9 are going to find that a lot faster than platform 7 itself.
That's absolutely true. Yes, I think this kind of coordinated response to nefarious content can definitely help. There's a counter argument that is often raised by companies like Facebook, which say that if you're a smaller company, you're not. They say that if you want to force this sort of content moderation on us through regulation, go ahead.
Yeah.
But what you're going to be doing is imposing costs on all the smaller companies, and it's only us, companies like Facebook and Google, that can comply with this regulation.
Yeah, so I want to get your perspective on this, and coming from Facebook as well. So content moderation at least on the surface, seems like a bad idea, right? I mean, you don't know where to stop when you go down that path. And as we know, regulators are probably not experts in content moderation, and so very blunt tools like that are probably not a good thing. And so then you ask, so you know, um, how do we actually counteract the misinformation? No, so suppose we say there is an entity that looks at all information and it's going to tag it, between 0 and 10. 10 meaning it's absolute ground truth. 0 means it's absolute wrong thing, not wrong thing, but yeah, it's a lie or it's not truth. Um, if you create an entity like that, we have all the problems that come with that type of a situation too, right? So is there anything that is obvious to you that would take care of this problem?
Well, I think this goes back to our question of the business
Yeah.
model. I think it's the business model that is instigating all these negative externalities. The business model being, this focus on data collection to the end of behavioral advertising, this development of algorithms in a very opaque but sophisticated manner to hold our attention, and finally this holding at bay of other rivals, potential rivals, through aggressive platform growth.
Yeah.
Leading to national monopoly. This is something that instigates the problems around the spread of disinformation, the spread of hate speech, the harms to privacy, the institution of commercialized bias. All of these kinds of negative externalities, in my personal view, are a product of this business model. They're negative externalities, and I think to control the negative externalities, what we can do is think about regulation of the business model. Think about privacy. Think about transparency over those algorithms, privacy for our data, competition to enable greater innovation in the marketplace. And I think by doing those things, we can reduce the rate of these negative externalities from 100% down to 10% or even lower.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Dipayan. So one thing that you suggested, let just conceptually, if you say platforms like Facebook and Google are natural monopolies, and they could be considered utilities, the platforms. But then applications on that platform, I don't know if you would consider Instagram to be an application on a Facebook platform. That could be completely open. Anybody could go on that platform, create their applications, and compete with others. The problem from a business model perspective, if I understand what you're saying, is that these platforms have natural monopoly-like characteristics in them. They are really utilities that everybody is using. And so if they're regulated that way, but keep anything on top of that to be open, I wonder if that will at least move us in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I think this is a brilliant question, brilliant direction of analysis. And I think you could argue that, yeah, the individual platforms within these corporations like Instagram, like WhatsApp, are natural monopolies in a sense. They serve a very specific market. They serve that market as a encrypted text messaging platform, and WhatsApp is a natural monopoly within that sector, or serve the specific market of picture share, politically correct picture sharing, let's say, and social media, which there's no other company that effectively does that. Instagram certainly has a you could argue a national monopoly in that space, but I would also argue that there's a set of super natural monopolies. Facebook, the corporation,
right,
is a natural monopoly that should be the subject of our analysis. as a first layer, in the sense, if the business model is focused on data collection and algorithmic development and platform growth, some might argue that, well, a company like WhatsApp doesn't meet all those considerations. It doesn't, in the sense that it doesn't collect any data. It doesn't, or rather, it's encrypted, so Facebook can't see the majority of data over WhatsApp. It doesn't use algorithms. What I would say is it's contributive to Facebook's overall business model, because you can bet that your social graph as revealed over WhatsApp is very useful data to Facebook. You can also bet that WhatsApp's control over the text messaging space globally is very important to Facebook's the corporation's future in the consumer internet ecosystem. So I think that's the right layer of analysis. Of course, it's not necessarily easy. It's not a trivial thing to suggest that we want to bring regulatory action against this corporation, but how do we do it?
Yeah,
it's politically and technically a very difficult problem.
Yeah, I mean, you got to prove the corporation is a natural monopoly. And, you think about Facebook platform, you think about search, Google search. These have very good characteristics of natural monopolies. And we have done that to electric utilities. We have done that to others. And there is no reason reinventing the Facebook platform. There is no reason reinventing the Google search. It will be a waste of resources for society and for everybody else. So,
Precisely.
Rather than creating Google 2 to compete with Google, we may just own up to the fact that search is really a utility that everybody should have. And natural monopoly, I don't know exactly, it might be a return type regulation, just like electric utilities, maybe other ways you can think about it. And then, without knowing a lot about it, Dipayan, I'll think about WhatsApp and Instagram as separate companies that operate on that utility platform. So it's almost like electricity. WhatsApp gets their power through the Facebook platform, but that's a different company altogether.
I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That WhatsApp is only contributive to the full economic force behind Facebook. It's independently a very important company, no doubt. If it were to break off of Facebook tomorrow, then it would still be very important. But who knows for how long?
Yeah.
Because if Facebook is then allowed to grow Messenger or grow a new text messaging platform and integrate it fully with Facebook, then and meanwhile shut WhatsApp out of its systems, then I would bet on that taking over the market. Of course, that presumes that there wouldn't be regulation stating that Facebook can't do those things.
Yeah, so that's why I'm very attracted to what you're thinking, which is it's regulation on the business model. It is not the typical things that people say. It's too big, let's break it up. That is not the issue. It's actually really thinking through what creates the issue. For me, what creates the issue is there is huge amount of scale in these business models, and with scale comes power, unfortunately. But you could separate scale from specific applications that people use. When you intermix them on the platform, your power sort of grows exponentially, and you can't even see what is being stored on the platform anymore.
Yes, absolutely. And I think some might then ask us, well, you're suggesting these should be regulated as natural monopolies. You're suggesting that Facebook should be a natural monopoly, or Google should be a natural monopoly, in the same way that an electric utility company is a natural monopoly. But doesn't that mean that the government will designate this one and only provider of a particular kind of service? And I would say no. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. That in instituting this natural monopoly or utility sort of regulation, we have to hamstring ourselves and say that, well, in regulating you like a utility, Facebook, we're also going to designate you as the sole provider, since, as you put eloquently earlier, it only makes sense for society to invest in one. I don't think we have to hamstring ourselves that way. I think we can acknowledge the market power of a company like Facebook or Google. We can acknowledge its strong natural monopoly features. We can call it a natural monopoly. We needn't regulate it like a utility in that traditional sense. But I think in making all those assertions, we can essentially extract all that extra wealth that Facebook is extracting currently, redistribute it across society, because that, I think, is what's needed. That we diminish Facebook's profit margins from whatever they are right now, 100%, 200%, 500%, I don't know. We diminish those profit margins to something that's more reasonable. And in fact, it's profit margins themselves that are often the subject of competition policy analysis. That, are you extracting too much wealth from the rest of society? Right. Are you extracting too much wealth from the labor market, from other media organizations that maybe take certain steps to protect democracy, protect consumers? Are you taking too much wealth from the rest of society? If so, then, well, we need to redistribute that wealth in some way and knock your profit margins back down from 500% to 100%, which is still pretty high.
Right. Yeah. So in conclusion, Dipayan, assuming that we have an administration change, a lot of people are hoping for that. What would be from your perspective, sort of the first step that you would take toward a better structure?
Well, I think we've. Thank you, Gil. I think we've come to a state where our media ecosystem has completely changed, and we need to acknowledge that it has changed fundamentally from the traditional place where we were in, let's say, 1990, and we now are in an age of high content, high targeting, and high curation, where the companies that are dominating the internet today have tremendous economic and media power, and to really start to combat that, we need to think about how their business models are structured and how we got here. That doesn't mean we need to say Facebook's bad and we need to break up Facebook, or we need to regulate Facebook's business model and focus on Facebook, but rather that we look at the ways that this business model came out of nothing.
Yeah.
And we think long and hard about how that came to be, and start to think about how to redistribute the wealth that is concentrated in Facebook back to the rest of society. And to do that, I think we need we need a new digital rights framework. We need a new social contract, a new negotiation of this distribution of power between consumers and the corporate. And to institute that, I think ultimately we will need a very strong privacy law. We will need to rethink competition, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
And we will need radical transparency over the ways that companies push content at us, whether it's organic or targeted advertising.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to touch on this. I just want to quickly ask you. So, one could argue at the highest level, your information is yours, not somebody else's. And if somebody else is taking your information, there has to be a monetization back to you. What we don't have in the system today is really, what we have is theft of valuable information. you know, um, and so maybe what we need is also on top of it, sort of a market for information that the person who actually owns that information could actually monetize.
I completely agree. And I think theft is not an unfair characterization of what's happening because there's a tremendous information asymmetry between the consumer and the consumer's experience of Facebook or Google, where think of the merchant, the fishmonger in sub-Saharan Africa. Think of the people on the streets in Chennai.
Yeah.
These are the typical users of Facebook.
Right.
Uh, and there's I think think of college students in the United States. I think there's a lack of awareness across the board in all of these constituencies, and we need a. I'm not willing to accept that every person in the world in every circumstance can come to understand how these platforms work, and I wouldn't want to require it of everyone. What I want instead is for companies to do the right thing, and if they don't, then they deserve to be regulated. We deserve to diminish that information asymmetry and enable our people, enable consumers to make fully informed decisions that are the best for them.
Right. Right. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. This has been great, Dipayan, and yeah, thanks so much for spending time with me. And good luck. Good luck in Washington.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have such a cerebral conversation with you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
All right.